Nice to see you. How are things?
Good, good, very good. Yeah, yeah, not bad. Crazy, but
Yeah, sure. Well, at least we had a Bordeaux on Primeur campaign, right?
I know. What a shocker.
So bizarre, isn't it?
That
The whole thing
was
is so
wonderful.
bizarre.
It is because here we are, and this is, part has part to do with, with what my strategy was for bringing out the report and things like that. I was kind of like thinking, oh, I can take it easy. There's not going to be much of a campaign, but if prices are going to be released, we have to be there.
Mm,
We're a buyer's guide. So, when the prices come out, we need to make sure the reviews are there. But, people aren't going to come out with prices till the end of June. And, nobody's going to be very interested.
yeah, yeah,
Ponte Cane like jumps the gate. I was planning to do a report or an article on Ponte Cane
yeah,
based on wines that I'd tasted back during 2019 harvest.
yeah.
So I did a vertical with Alfred back then. I hadn't rolled that out yet. I thought, okay, I just re-reviewed the 2010 with the big retrospective that I'd done in
Yeah.
February. And then I was going to come out and re-review it again in the
Mm,
context of that tasting that I'd done. So that was the plan. And I was actually going to the 2 days after Ponte Cane released their prices, I was going to release that article, but not with the 2019, because I was going to save the 2019 back
mm,
to go in my major report, which I was planning to put out at the end of June.
yeah,
Um, and then I just sort of went, stop press, stop press. I went to my editorial team. We got to get this note in there. We've got to get this note in there. And
yeah,
also because I'd had the conversation with Justine,
yeah,
I
yeah,
said, okay, and then I'm going to add this to the end of the article, so that people have a little bit of context to make buying
yeah, yeah,
decisions with. And, I wanted the message to be very clear that the price decisions that Alfred Tesseron had made had nothing to do with the quality of the vintage. He was obviously
yeah.
making a statement on the state of the economy
Mm,
and where the market was and where this readjustment needed to be.
mm,
And that's really what I wanted to come out to say for our readers, is that
yeah,
actually this wine is really, really good.
yeah, yeah,
And actually the price is really good. And if you love this style of wine, and again, I always say to people, you have to read the tasting notes as well to know if you're going to like this style of wine. If you love this
sure.
style of wine, you love Ponte Cane, this is going to be a great one.
I guess we always knew that the release of the 2019s was going to be complicated. It was going to be unlike anything that we'd ever experienced before in terms of getting to taste the wines, in terms of how we were going to offer the wines, and things changed very fast. And obviously there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes with that. So when did you first become aware that there was going to be a campaign, and how did you start the process of organizing how you were going to taste? Did you go to people, or did people start to come to you, or was it a bit of both?
Well, it was really during the last week of April that the penny dropped for me that there was going to be a campaign. Before that, I kept saying to everyone, other reviewers on our team, and also the heads of Michelin, because we talk all the time about
Mm,
strategy, about editorial calendar, what we're going to do. And I was very reticent to have barrel samples sent to me here in California. I thought, well, if there's not going to be a campaign, because before that, people were saying, well, let's put the campaign off until the
yeah,
autumn. Let's do it later, and we'll do it as we normally do, but we'll do it later. I was completely prepared not to produce a report if the samples that came into me weren't showing well.
yeah,
And that was the most important thing for me, that they arrived in good condition, and that when I opened them and tasted them, there was absolutely no signs of oxidation, of
mm,
volatile acidity, or of anything, any of the horrors that can happen, with a
mm, mm,
wine that's so unstable. But the good news is these barrel samples are pretty stable. And I think that has to do, one, with the vintage, um,
mm,
uh, slightly lower pHs across the board. There are a few examples where the pHs were surprisingly high, but slightly lower pHs for the most part.
yeah,
And that we were 2 months further down the line as well when the samples were sent. So they were just a little bit more stable than they would have been, say, if this had happened in March or April.
I guess they'd been through that extra racking by that point as well, hadn't they? So they were just going to be a little bit more settled, and I guess there's just a bit less that can go wrong.
Yeah, and well, and you never know. This is wonderful, to sort of consider these theories, but you never really know until you start tasting them, right?
Well, this was what I was going to say. I mean, so this is literally the first time that you've had barrel samples from Bordeaux shipped.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, I really didn't think that some of the players that did send barrel samples would ever even consider sending barrel samples.
That was a big surprise to us,
because that was my other concern, was having a comprehensive enough report. Because you kind of have to understand, if you're going to put out a vintage report, you have to understand what the vintage is doing from top to bottom. And so you do need some of those benchmark grades from every region in order to sort of make that assessment. And if those pieces of the puzzle are missing, then you really can't sort of make a really accurate vintage assessment. So that was the other big thing when and I think it was when Cause d'Astronal came to me and said they would send samples. And then, I started, inquiring with other people, the first rows, the big players on the right bank, and, saying, would you be willing to send samples? I was surprised by the number of people who came back and said, yes, let's do it. And some of them took some incredible measures to get their wines here, in really good condition. I have to say, some were better than others. There were some. I mean, there was a really sort of bashed up, like, cooked bottle that I found shoved in my mailbox. Somebody just sent it by snail mail. That one didn't get tasted. No. And there were some smashed bottles and things like that. But for the most part, people were really conscientious, and there a lot of samples I got within 2 or 3 days of them being drawn, which was great.
I couldn't believe the quality of the condition of some of the things that I've tasted. I mean, I really, when you think, and I'm not saying it wasn't a real concern before, because you have to take people at their word. But when people have said to you, look, we can't send samples, they're not stable, and then all of a sudden they're forced to, and actually you go, wow, these are just great. These wines taste great. And I know, again, it goes back to, and it's a point we'll pick up again a bit further into the conversation about the impact of the extra 2 months, the vintage, and what impact that had on the tasting as well. But I really, and the thing that really surprised me, and again, and this is something we'll pick up further on, but I couldn't believe how I could go back to the wines 3 or even 4 days later.
Yes.
And there was no sense of decay. Even in some cases, they were coming good.
I agree.
Even better.
Yes. And certainly with Aubryon, I mean, that was a very tight wine when I first opened it up, and that was one of the wines that got better and better and better. Mouton, I was really surprised about. I tasted it every day after the first day I tasted it, and a week later, it was still looking gorgeous.
Yeah.
I was like, how can this be?
I know. So, okay, well, that leads us quite interestingly on to the next question I was going to ask you, which is about, I don't know how you always plan your trip, but certainly we, it's partly because we know it works with timings and all the rest of it. But we have a really set routine now. When we travel to Bordeaux, we have an absolutely set routine, not just left bank, right bank, but literally which day we do certain things on. Some of the reasons for that are historic, but it's become our set pattern. And we now feel so comfortable in that pattern. We know, and we sort of say to ourselves, okay, don't get too overexcited when you're tasting that, because we know we're going to go on to that. Or when you've tasted all those, then we're going to do that. And then you go, don't forget, we had that. and because you do it in 4 days, or well, we do it in 5 days, of very intense stuff where we're tasting the same things in the same order. It's very easy to keep those patterns in your mind for when you're creating your overall perception of a vintage. So do you do the same thing as that? Do you try and do things in a certain order? And or when you got your wines, how did you start to think, well, okay, how am I going to do this? Did you start grouping them by region? Did you group them by price? I mean, or did you just go, I'm going to taste them as soon as they come, so they're as fresh as they can be? How did you make it work?
It had to be that way. I mean, to be fair to the wineries and to the samples, they had to be tasted within 48 hours. That was my absolute maximum, 48 hours of arriving. So they would arrive usually in the morning, although some arrived in the afternoon, but usually there was a big shipment in the morning. They would all go down to I've just moved into a house that has a really big cellar downstairs.
Okay. Are you in California? Or are you in New
Yes,
York?
I'm in Napa.
Oh, right. Okay, cool.
And so all of the boxes would get downstairs into the cellar to cool down and to rest for 24 hours. So that would be the next day's tastings. And then all of the samples that had come in from the day before, and in the evenings, I would unpack them and group them so I would know what my strategy would be for that day. I would come up from the cellar, and they would be tasted as well as they could within peer groups. But there was no sort of trying to pre-plan how that was going to happen, because really you had to just take what was coming in and taste it at its freshest in order to be. But that's okay. I'm used to sort of swapping and changing and tasting, and in many ways it was interesting and fun, and maybe even more telling to do it that way, to taste things that you wouldn't have ordinarily grouped together. Like that. And it really was an eye opener for some wines. Being able to have that opportunity to taste, certain wines together that you almost never get the chance to taste together. One of the ones I put out on social media was the Vieux Chateau Certain and the La Conseillante, which of course are right next door to each other. Very different wines. But it's really sort of, I mean, that having that opportunity, that exercise to taste them together and really sort of hone in on why they are so different stylistically. And being able to accurately describe that for people, because for me, it's just so important to be able to capture the personality and the style of the wine so that people will know, do I like that or do I like that? And so they're both knocking on the same doors in terms of scores. Maybe one is slightly higher, but maybe somebody will prefer the style of the other one, and ultimately that's way more important than scores.
I think that's right. And as you say, that what you did have as well, and once you discovered, particularly once you were into the swing of it and you started to discover that the wines were still tasting good, at least on the same level as they were before, 3 or even 4 days later, when some other things have arrived, you can go, okay, I know I've already tasted that once, and I tasted it when it was super fresh, but now I'm going to say, I'm going to put that group together, I'm going to put that group together, I'm just going to revisit, and it just clarifies things in your mind, and it helps you, as you say, to understand those stylistic differences, I guess.
Yeah. It was so much fun, I have to say. Just having the bottles was fun. You as a wine dork, you just love to have the bottles and to be able to go back and to taste them like this and to taste them in different orders and with different sets. And so, my evenings were like that. Once I'd set everything up for the next day's tastings, I'd then, just have kind of fun, just going back to all of these wines that I had collected over into a corner, of things I wanted to retaste, to look at again, to taste with that, and it was a really fun way. Actually, I have to say, I wasn't expecting it to be fun. I was expecting it to be a bit of a train wreck. But, once I got into it, I could see actually there's a lot of method to this madness. And I think, we've learned a lot of lessons from doing Primeur's campaigns like this that we can certainly use in years to come. and it's really all about producing better reports, being able to communicate better about the wines, about the vintage, and all of that. And so I think it was an incredibly worthwhile exercise. I will hasten to add that I felt, I always feel you cannot, do justice to a vintage report or region without actually being there and on the ground and understanding it. And I was actually in Bordeaux during part of the harvest in late September. And I visited Ducros-Beaucailleux, I'd been at Petitclos, I'd been at, a bunch of different properties, already doing some groundwork. So I already had a lot of ideas about 2019. And then I'd also been in February. In fact, I managed to swoop into Bordeaux to finish off the 2017s in bottles just before the whole COVID lockdown started to happen. So also talking to a lot of chateau owners about 2019 then. And, and that was just that some people had already done their blends by then. A lot of people, commented they'd done their blends early this year. Because
I think that was something that I heard as well. Was certainly when we were talking with Philippe and Hervé at Mouton, that was exactly what they said. Was that it's not. Don't forget that it isn't just more time. The wines haven't just had more time at the end in terms of when we're tasting them. They've got more time from the beginning because the blends made their own decisions so quickly.
That's always went into a positive thing as well. Yes.
Yeah, they went into the barrel, and everything was that they did. They weren't picking terribly late like they do in some cases. Everything, so you've got an extra week or even 10 days maybe at the beginning, as well as the extra time you had before we received any samples.
Absolutely, yeah, and it was a really exciting way to look at the wines, and all told, and a very exciting vintage to do it for. It might have been a different story if it wasn't such a great vintage.
Well, I think that's true.
Going,
I think that's true. Did you get to do lots of kind of calls and Zoom conversation stuff with producers while you were doing the tastings as well?
That was the juggle. Yeah, that was the juggle because every morning, because I'm in California, I have a sort of limited window of opportunity, and in many ways that was good because I like to taste in the morning. So I would get my Zoom calls out of the way. I think the latest ones I did were at 10 a.m. my time. And then boom, I was ready to start tasting for the day. But some of the Zoom calls I did would start at 6 a.m. But that's an essential part because, I need to, it's almost like an egg and chicken or egg kind of situation because I need to start tasting some wines before I know what questions to ask people. And I know that with a lot of the tastings that we were doing with the chateau owners and the winemakers, they wanted to taste with me, but many cases I tasted either the day before or in the morning just before them, because the wine is what gives me the questions to ask them. I don't ask them the same questions that I ask everybody. I don't ask them the same questions I asked last year. There are certain things that I see in the wines and I want to know how that happened. And so I kind of need to taste. And in many ways, that was a really good justification for the way that we did the tastings this year, having the samples sent to us, being able to do the tastings. Then I could think about it, and then I knew what I wanted to ask. Because usually when you're doing it in Bordeaux, you're there and you're tasting, and the winemaker's going, yeah. You're like,
you're right.
I'm just trying to think here.
and then you end up with the risk that the tail ends up wagging the dog, and the whole, that's the point, isn't it? You're there to listen, but you primarily, you're really there to ask those questions that your listeners or your readers are going to want to know the answers to. Yeah. So as you say, that comes from your experience of tasting the wine. One of the things we love about it is that having those opportunities to talk to the winemakers and to sort of to get under the skin of it a bit more. And I say when I love it when I get back and I write our our report for the company, and I've spent, I've been totally immersed in it for 6 or 7 days, and it's all still fresh in your mind. You've got all the booklets you can refer to if you need technical stuff, but it's all really there. It's packed in, and I love the process of sitting down and getting that done. But one of the questions that obviously we always ask, and people always hate, is this business of, when people say, which vintage is it like? Which other vintage would you compare it to? And, sometimes wine writers make it difficult for themselves because they might say, it's like a such and such of the 2009, or it reminds me of the 86 or whatever. And so people always think in this way of like, well, what other vintage is it like? Certainly my experience of this is that certainly the last 4 years really have all been super different and pretty hard to pin into one other very comparable year. But this one seems more than ever, because it to me, it picks up so many different bits of even vintages from the last 12 years or so. How you've now got obviously a very strong perception of vintage. How do you deconstruct 2019 into a way that people who know Bordeaux can understand?
Yeah, I think what you said is absolutely correct. That this is different, and it's not just growing season phenomena. It's also has to do with the whole shift in what's happening in the vineyards, which is really becoming very clear now. Oops, I've got a little button coming in here, which has really become very clear now. All of the taking and really focusing on different blocks and parts of vineyards within blocks, and micromanaging every little thing in the vineyard, so that you get exactly what you're looking for in terms of ripeness from each grape variety, from each vine age, from each section of the vineyard. So we've got that coming through, along with much, much more sensitive winemaking. So the whole landscape of what Bordeaux is being transformed now. And that's exciting, because we're seeing a level of purity that I don't think that we've seen before. And, if we look at what the signatures of this vintage are, this kind of brightness, that buzzword energy, but it does have an energy. And if you're looking at, fruit in various states of ripeness, underripe, lean, green, mean, this sort of crunchiness or this juiciness that you get with, slightly overripe fruit. It's that crunchiness to the fruit. It's like biting into a perfectly ripe pear, or if you're talking about white wines, or a plum with the reds. It's that real sort of perfect, just crunchy, bright fruit. And yet what I loved about the vintage as well is that people weren't selling their souls either. There is a minerality, an earthiness, a savoriness about Bordeaux that needs to be like the first thing you're tasting and seeing. And how that shined through with all of that really sort of bright, pure, crunchy fruit in the background is what this vintage is all about for me. So, being able to compare that to other vintages is difficult, because I think where we've had other vintages like this, people have got maybe overly ambitious with the tannins. And the other thing that I really loved about this vintage was how the tannins were managed. That level of precision that people keep talking about. And I think there were a few years where they were talking about it and it wasn't exactly happening, but this year it happened, and so I was expecting a lot of hard, chewy tannins at this stage. And those tannins have, a way of overshadowing the fruit. So you can't really see the greatness that's lying underneath there. Here, people knew when to cut off the extraction. They were very sort of gentle in the opening stages, and I heard this again and again and again. But they also knew when to say, right, that's enough tannin. We've got the good stuff, and that's what we want. More tannin is not going to make it better.
Well, I was reminded. I went back into my 2018 report, and I had this great quote from Baptiste at Lafleur, who said, tannins are like friends. Said what matters is quality, not quantity.
Yes, exactly.
And I thought it's just such a great way of putting it, because I was the same as you when I started reading about, the IPT levels, and you're going, geez, these are the same as the 18s. In some cases, they're as high as the 18s, and yet the 18s were defined by tannins, whereas these, you almost felt like you had to go looking for them.
Yeah.
Because they were so wrapped in this amazing glycerol and this beautiful fruit, and yet nothing ever felt fat, not in a bad way. They as you say, they had lift as well as being broad. I thought it was quite an extraordinary combination.
I think that in itself can lead people into thinking that maybe it's not as great a vintage as I believe it is. I think it's a really great vintage. There's again, with those slightly lower pHs, slightly higher acidity, high level of tannin, but really good quality tannin. And that brightness of fruit, you can see where that's going to go. And all of these little minute layers in there of nuances, that's someplace for the wine to develop out into. And I'm really, really excited to see how these wines are going to age, because I think they will be approachable, relatively approachable, a little bit like Napa wines, but there's nothing similar about the style of Napa wines and this vintage. But a little bit like Napa wines, they can be a little bit deceptive in that, you taste them in the first few years and they're delicious and they're really drinkable, but they're nothing like they're going to be in 10, 15, 20 years when they really sort of, blossom out and show you what they've got to give. So, yeah, I mean, coming back to your question, it's hard, because I don't think, we might have had similar but not exactly the same vintage or growing season conditions with other vintages, and other, great vintages, 2005, 2010. But no, the wines are so different. And I think they're different from anything that Bordeaux has ever produced as well. And I mean that in a good way. I think for a lot of people that love, like I said, that sort of understated restraint, that sort of savory minerality, this is a great vintage for that. But with wonderful purity and fruit too. It's kind of got it all. I think that it is a less polarizing vintage than 2018 was. 2018 was one of those, big, rich, extreme blockbuster vintages. And I think, there are some legendary wines in there. They're going to really, really, wow people. But I think that for a lot of people, they're just going to fall in love with 2019 because.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that the funny thing is that, these, what you might call friendly vintages, like 2000 or 2009, people run the risk of over a period of time of not drinking them, while they're sort of waiting for their, maybe like we do with our 10-year retrospective, they can almost be a bit dismissive of those vintages. They don't consider them to be serious vintages, and then they're sort of saying, well, we'll see at 10 years old, we'll see that they're not that much cop, or they're just glossy, or they're just just tarty wines, they've got no substance. And certainly I know there are a lot of people who went into our 2009 10-year on tasting expecting them to be one dimensional, just big, sunny, shiny nonsense. And those wines are mega, and it was the freshness of the 2009s that took people by surprise. We knew the ripeness of fruit was there. Yeah. And we knew there was a good bit of structure, but it was the freshness, the brightness and the freshness and the energy. And I think that is what people will have with these 19s, is that, people will not take these wines seriously at their peril. And I quite agree with you that people tend to look at those because people never talked about the 10s in the same way as they talked about the 9s. The 10s were because these are 50 to 70-year wines.
Yeah,
it's like,
it's
well,
not painful when you first taste it, then it's not going to age well.
Yeah, and it's like that might have been true 20 years ago or more, but as you say, the difference now is about how they're handling every bit of the vineyard and also the work in the winery. I mean, that is the stuff that is just invaluable. The micro vinification, by plot vinification, it changes the game, and you see it at Figeac. You can literally see it in action because you've seen how they have now got so much control of every little bit. And for me, when I tasted Figeac, I was like, every time I went to the glass, I was picking up. I was like, oh, that's that bit of Cabernet Franc. I can feel it. That's that bit of Merlot. I can feel it. The layer and the layer. You can just identify every last bit before you've even put anything in your mouth. You're picking out all the little pieces. I just fell in love with Figeac, but that's been a long running affair. Certainly, it's gained intensity.
I mean, we've all seen Figeac go from strength to strength, and Frederic has just like done an amazing job, with transforming the vineyard, transforming the winery, and also really finding, the heart and soul of what that vineyard is. And expressing it, whether it's with a bit more Cabernet Sauvignon in the vineyard, and just astonishing how the vision that he's had, and seeing that vision through. And for me, I was expecting it to be good, no doubt about it, because they've been on fire in recent years. But this vineyard. This vintage really played to everything that Frederic has been doing, and it's just wow.
Yeah, I agree. We talked at the beginning when we were talking about Ponte and its first release, and obviously the price being, a benchmark really then that so many people followed. And again, going back to the point you were making before about the need for you to be putting something out there because of your readers and it being a buying guide. When you're tasting, I mean, do you care about prices? Does it make any difference to you? Do you try and think about weighting your ratings or expectations based on where you think prices will be or whatever, or do you just try and put all that to one side?
No, we have a policy, and Bob never did either. We don't, I don't even look at prices usually when I'm tasting. Everything has to do with what's in the glass, I have to say. Sure. That's it. Quality is about what's in the glass, and then you're describing what's in the glass. And the market finds its prices. And that's exactly. I think that's how you have to play wine criticism. Now, after all is said and done, it's nice to come back and make some comments on value, or whether something's good value, and I will if I think something is really super value or an absolute bargain, I'll come out and say that, which is part of what we do as well. But no, when we're being critical, when we're reviewing a wine in terms of scores and in terms of description, it doesn't matter.
No. I we always try and there are some merchants who will be very, very upfront and quite outward with their opinions on saying, we don't think this is a good buy, or we wouldn't recommend this, or what have you, and that's fine. There's room for that. Our policy is a bit more. If we think something is a real bargain, then of course we will say that. And if it's something that at the higher end of the scale that has all kinds of financial reasons why you should buy it, then we're very happy to explore that kind of stuff too. But equally, I kind of feel like you shouldn't, as you say, markets exist for a reason, and prices will find their level. And people who try and reposition to a point where it's very easy for people to say, well, I don't know how they justify that price. Well, the price won't stay there forever if the wine doesn't sell, so it will find its way. And we sort of try and sort of say, look, this is a really great wine. If you want it, here's the price.
Yeah, because what people are willing to pay doesn't always have to do with quality, and unfortunately, it doesn't always have to do with style either. Sometimes it has to do with the brand name itself and all of the cachet that comes with that. I totally get that.
Yeah.
There are people who want to flash a very, rare or well-known name or label, and and part of the price is all about that. It's about the brand.
Yeah.
And you have
They didn't often, these big brands don't often get big because they weren't very good.
Yeah,
That's what people forget.
Well, this is it. This is it. They started out small at one stage of the game, and then as their reputation was built. Yes, there you go.
So going back to this point, and it's really interesting because of the thing you were saying about the ability to revisit wines, and certainly I had an experience where I tasted one thing and I got very excited, and I was thinking about my score, and then I was just reminded that 2 days before I'd had another sample of a first growth, and I went back to that, and it kind of just put me back in my box a bit. Don't get so overexcited because this thing is clearly was up here, and I was maybe not quite the same thing. So there were certain things about the way this campaign, from a critical and from a merchant perspective, in terms of the tasting, were handled that were beneficial. But as we've discussed, there are also some bits with the ease of conversation and the getting the sense of the buzz of a vibe, when you're in the town for the tastings that we lost. If I was going to put a gun to your head and say you've got to do it one way or another forever, mm-hmm. You've either got to continue to have things sent and you can manage them at your own pace, or you have to go back to just traveling and tasting. Which is your preferred way?
I'd still do the traveling and tasting.
Not just because you get to go have some really nice cool dinners and stuff. Because I love that bit too.
No, I don't do the dinners.
That's one of my favorite bits.
No, I don't do dinners at all. I do the occasional sandwich lunch. Woo! Yes, no, I'm pretty strict on that because I have such long days. I have to get up in the morning and but that said, I feel like I get so much more out of the visits. And like I said, I was able to do it this year because I'd already had 2 visits per se that were, not completely about 2019, but were partly about 2019. Bordeaux, and I need to spend a little bit of time there, kind of peeling back and looking behind the scenes, and speaking to people. And I do think that it's important, and I do all sorts of, weird little things too. Like I will taste on an appointment, and then I'll go back and do another surprise visit, taste again. If I feel like I need to taste again. I usually get to taste most of the wines 3, 4, sometimes 5 times, through various different organizations and the direct visits. So I think that, there's a definite value to being there on the ground, being able to talk to people. And, there's nothing like the sort of candid conversations that you can have, with people as well when you're one-on-one. There's something a little bit more disarming, I think, about being sat there. Than being on a Zoom call where people are just like, I know what I'm going to say, and I've got my script here.
We've certainly developed a bit of a Bordelais body language translation guide.
Yeah.
When you walk into that room or when they pour the glass, from the way they hold themselves or from the way they look at you or they don't look at you or whatever, you start to go, okay, you're either really pleased with this, or you're not that pleased with it, or whatever it might be. So, no, I think you're right. I guess what it could mean is that you could end up with a bit of best of both worlds. So if there was something where you were a bit unsure or whatever, you could now, with relative confidence. I know. I'm going back on my own point now. But what you could do is with relative confidence on both sides, on your side and on the winemaker's side, that you could now be sort of saying, could you just send me one more? I just want to get my head around this or that or the other. Or
not even that, can you send, I'm doing a comparative tasting of, such and such an area. Can you, send a sample in for this, because I want to look at you in context. And again, it's not about, I think that the particularly the higher ups, they get so concerned that, I'm going to be, tasted alongside and compared, and they're going to get, a point or two higher than me. But it's not even about that. Like I said, it's mostly about being able to capture those minute differences that you really want to communicate to people, and that serves the chateau as much as it serves me and my readers. That you want to be differentiated. You want somebody to really take note of why you are unique from this person and this person and this person. And that's what I love doing. I think that's really what the crux of my job is being able to communicate that, so that somebody who hasn't tasted the wine can say, oh, I love that style of wine. That wine I have to have, because that's me. And everybody's different. I have my own personal preferences. Everybody has their own personal preferences. And you're looking for keywords and clues within a tasting note that's consistently written that will tell you, oh, that's what I like. I like that type of wine.
Yeah. I know. I think that's right. I think, and I certainly, even vintage to vintage, I went back over my 18 notes, I went back over my 17 notes, and there were things where I was kind of, and this goes back to your point you were making earlier, which is you just can't ever emphasize it enough, that, scores on their own they serve a purpose, but you have to understand, there were so many things that I scored the same as the 18s, and yet the wines were just stratospheric, even from the same estate. The wines are stratospherically different.
Some people who like the 18s and some people who like the 19s, because they're chalk and cheese. They're so different, even from the same chateau. Very, very different. And you have to follow the report, but also just read the tasting note. It's all there. And I think in terms of critics, being able to craft a good tasting note is maybe underestimated, and maybe even not taken seriously enough amongst some critics. I do try very, very hard to capture, is this a big, powerful behemoth, or is this light and delicate, ethereal, perfume? What is this? Because, doing so makes all the difference, I think. It will make all the difference to the experience that person has when they buy, for a considerable amount of money in some cases, a bottle of wine. And are they getting, that 95, 97, 98, 100-point experience to their expectations? Is it the style that they love? And that's the most important thing, because you don't want to disappoint somebody,
What were your 5 favorite wines? And why?
Well, if money is no object, my 5 favorite
Money is
wines,
no object,
Okay, money is no object. I have to say, Vieux Chateau Sauternes, really, it was a wine that I came back to again and again in the bottle, because it's one of those wines. It's kind of an enigma to me. The tannins in particular, but also the nuances of the fruit are like nothing else that you get in Pomerol. It's just it floors me. They've obviously been on a roll in recent years, the Timpon Father and Son, but this year I just having that chance to have a bottle of it and keep coming back to it and back to it, and the ripeness of the tannins, and I don't know if it's that little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon tannin in there, a little bit more of that Cabernet Franc in there. There's like this graininess that's almost like a really great left bank wine in terms of the tannin texture, but the fruit and the nuances are all Merlot and Pomerol, and it's just I love it. Of course, the
Okay, you can
Leglise.
have that one. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leglise Cleané. I
Yeah.
have to say, I remember, earlier this year tasting the 2010 Leglise Cleané and going, oh wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it just really, and I had tasted it blind. That was a blind tasting that I'd had it in, and it was Leglise Cleané, but it was also wow. And then tasting this, that much further on down the line, really expressing, a man's lifetime of work, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
hard not to taste that with that emotional connection as well, obviously, with what
yeah,
happened. But
yeah,
I think even regardless, I agree with you. It's spectacular.
spectacular. Aubryon, and more than in fact, I personally like the Aubryon more than the La Mission Aubryon, even though I gave the La Mission a higher score.
Yeah.
Aubryon, I just want to come back to that in 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
That's gonna be like, it really will be one of the great vintages of Aubryon. Like, and a little bit Ferris and the crushed rocks, and but there's so much fruit and floral notes in there. It's really good.
Okay.
I've got a soft spot. I got a soft spot for Les Velasquez. I just love the signature of the vineyard. I love what they've been doing in recent years as well, and really sort of bringing it to the forefront as an individual. It's a wine that maybe has more power, I suppose, but just so beautifully expressed.
It's a wine that I look forward to see. It's the one, and Le Fleur. It's the wine on the left bank where when I'm walking along that gravel and I'm going to go into that room, I'm standing there with Pierre and I'm going to taste it.
Yeah.
And you have all these other wines you have to taste before, and they're all great wines, but I just can't. I'm impatient. It's the wine where I just can't wait to get it in my glass and put my nose in, and I'm going to go. There's the vineyard. There it is. Yeah. Every single vintage, and it's always different because obviously it's like a prism. The vineyard is the perfect prism through which to shine every vintage, but it just every single time you're just standing in the vineyard the minute you put your nose in it. I haven't tasted the 19 yet, but I think it's a wine that is I cannot wait.
There's something, I don't know, is it, I keep trying to sort of say to myself, is it that it is so perfectly poised on the cusp of Pauillac and Saint Julien? And I know and maybe that there's something about that in itself, it's that almost juxtaposition that
gives a bit of tension.
Yeah, but I just love how they've been expressing it in recent vintages really, really well. And Cos d'Estournel, I every time I taste it, I'm like, And you know what? The other one that, of course, I didn't get to taste yet is Montrose. The two of those wines are just like, wow. I really they're very different, but the signatures of those two wines is just amazing. And
I think particularly once you've got the sense of the way that this vintage expresses minerality, and you know how much minerality Montrose delivers, you're just sort of going,
I know, I'm very excited about Montrose.
I just can't wait. I can't wait.
I can't.
And then so you've got five glorious wines there for those with the deep pockets.
Yeah.
What about for people who perhaps are thinking, who are saying, well, look, what would you buy? What are the inside tips? If you had to pick a few things where you said, don't overlook this, or something that's come back that used to be good and then was not good for a while, or something that people just won't know about at all.
I've got to say that one of the biggest surprises of this vintage for me was how good even the more modestly priced left bank wines are. The Cabernet this year is astonishingly good, and getting to be even better managed even in areas like Listrac and Mouly. Wow, some amazing wines this year. So a lot of my wines are actually more modestly priced left bank or Medoc wines. First one I have to say is Pedesclo. They've been on a roll in recently, of course, since they were purchased back in 2009. But this year I feel like, wow, it's really coming together. They are really, getting up there and punching above their weight, as I think we all expected they would once, they'd been purchased and that investment was going into the vineyards and into the winery. Just a really, really good showing. And again, not a crazy price this year. The one that really surprised me this year, the one that made me say, oh, now I see what you're doing, was La Lagune. Obviously they've Caroline has been through a rough patch there. But wow, the wine is really, really stunning this year. What I love about it, it almost feels it's like it's come out like a phoenix from the flames, because it's transformed. It's like a new wine almost. Really, really special. The Siran from Margaux. Another, under the radar wine that I think, really overperformed this year. Orme de Pez as well, and Stanistet.
Big high fives to Orme de Pez. What a £210 a case for that wine doesn't make any sense. I'm never going to tell Jean-Charles that, obviously, because I don't want to put it up, but it's ridiculous.
No, but it was particularly good this year as well. Particularly good this year. Really, really, really impressive. I was excited by that wine as well. And Chateau de la Roque in Saint-Emilion. I love this wine. This is just going from strength to strength. And I still can't believe the price.
I think it was our third or fourth biggest volume seller of the campaign.
Oh, good.
I mean, we sold shed loads of it.
Yeah, as you should. I mean, these wines, and one of the reasons I picked these wines, I hasten to add, are they're wines that you can, they're all around. I think I did a quick check between. I think the most expensive, the Pedesclo and then La Lagune, are selling for about $33 a bottle here in the U.S. And the La Roque, $24. Can you believe it? And the Orme has as well, $24. It's crazy. But what I wanted to say, these are great wines just to buy and put in the cellar for 10, 15, 20 years, because they've got the stuffing, to age as well. Put them away, and oh my gosh, they're going to be glorious, for a very small investment. And also, I was thinking when I was looking at these wines, if you know somebody who's young, maybe they're graduating this year from high school or college or something like that, and you want to give them a great gift, a couple of cases of wines like this, have them put it away. They can drink a few bottles. Well, they probably won't last long for young people.
The thing is, they're too damn good straight off the bat. They'll just open one and go, oh my God, I'm not going to wait to drink the rest of this. Even though they should.
But if you can, I mean, and at these prices, you can afford to buy, 5-10 cases of them, put them in the cellar, and like I said, drink a few, early on, but give them some time. I mean, these wines are meant to go, and particularly La Roque. That's going to be like, wow. I would hesitate giving it 30. Even 40 years, maybe. It's
one just sort of last thing I was going to ask you, just sort of off the cuff, really, was, there's been a lot of talk. There's talk every year about, this is the end of En Primeur. En Primeur's not relevant. This is, I kind of have a feeling like, in the most unlikely circumstances, despite all of the problems, that this kind of, it feels like En Primeur has been re-energized by this campaign. And I think it's partly the wines, it's partly the ray of sunshine in a fairly tragic world. I don't know, it's a whole combination of things, but I feel like it's been extraordinarily positive, and it might give En Primeur another kick. What do you think?
I think people have enjoyed coming back to the concept of wine collecting. We've all been, staying at home. We've all got, modest cellars, probably at least. Or,
Yeah.
But just to sort of in the evening, go down to the cellar, choose a nice bottle or two, and to have the memories that came with the purchasing of that bottle. I think that people are coming back around to this. We're coming around to the fact that we're probably going to be spending a lot more time at home.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
We're going to be drinking a lot more wine. We were, lucky for a while there. We spent a lot of time going out and traveling and being able to go to regions and things like that. But now I think we're going to have to bring the regions to us.
Lisa, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time.
It's been a long chat. Sorry, I talk a lot.
No, I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it.